In an orphanage in London, a matron heads down to the front door to lock it, but she eventually gets distracted by the items on the floor. Even though most of the things there are letters for the orphanage, the matron only picks up a magazine and heads to her room. A girl named Sophie then sneaks out of her room and goes to lock the door, after which she picks up all the letters and arranges them in the matron's office. As she's doing this, Sophie hears some men playing around on the street in front of the orphanage. She then opens the window and shouts at the men to leave because there are kids inside the orphanage who are already sleeping. She also threatens to call the cops on them if they don't leave. Almost immediately, the men walk away from the street and Sophie heads to the room.
I'll call the coppers. I will do it.
As she gets there, she covers herself with her blanket and puts on a torchlight to read a book. The matron sees the light reflection coming from the room, but as she goes inside to check if the kids aren't sleeping, Sophie quickly turns off the torchlight and pretends to be asleep. After the matron leaves, Sophie's cat heads out to the balcony, and she wonders why it left her bed. As she follows it to check what lured it out, Sophie sees some cats down the street looking scared of something in the corner. Suddenly, a giant hand appears out of nowhere and lifts the fallen waste cans in the corner. Sophie cannot believe this, and as the giant shows his face, she looks scared. The giant realizes that she has seen him, and as he heads toward the orphanage, Sophie returns to her bed and covers herself up with the blanket. As the giant gets to the front of the orphanage, he picks up Sophie from her bed and flees the scene. Even though other people nearly see him, he hides quite well, and eventually embarks on a journey to his house. As they get there, the giant hangs Sophie's blanket to a tree branch in his room. Sophie still looks scared because she doesn't know what he's up to, and as she peeps out of the blanket, she sees him sharpening his knives. Sophie doesn't want to be killed, so she escapes from the hanged blanket and heads for the window. Unfortunately, it can't be opened, but as Sophie tries to see what else she can do, she knocks down some things, and the giant realizes that she wants to escape. He then walks up to her and says she can't escape unless she has wings. He adds that she needs to stop disturbing him because he wants to eat.
He's hungry. It's time for eats.
After this, he knocks her down into his frying pan, which he drops on his kitchen slab. As he then cuts a big fruit, Sophie asks where they are, and he says they're in giant country. Sophie cannot believe this, and as she hears some noises coming from outside the giant's house, she asks what's happening. The giant then checks the window and sees that the other giants in the area have returned home. Sophie can't believe there are others like him, but the giant tells her the names of the others. Since they all have scary names, Sophie begs the giant not to eat her, but he says he's not like the others. He also says she has profiled him wrongly, but Sophie thinks it's normal to consider him a bad person because he kidnapped her. The giant says he had his reasons, but that he's now feeling pity for Sophie's parents, who might now be looking for her. Sophie says her parents died when she was a baby, and that she lives in an orphanage. She asks if the giant didn't know where he took her from, and he says he didn't. He then asks if she likes the orphanage, but she says she hates it. She mentions that the matron who runs the place is incompetent, and she has crazy rules. As she says that the matron always punished all the kids wrongly, the giant asks how she punished them. Sophie then says she locks them in a dark, rat-infested cellar. The giant thinks the matron is a bad person, and Sophie asks if the other giants are as nice as him. He says they aren't, and that they wouldn't think twice about eating her. Sophie looks scared and asks why he brought her there, and he says he had to. He mentions that after she saw him, he knew there was a possibility that she would tell everyone about him, and it would lead to a hunt for him and the other giants, who would then be in danger.
Look, see giant hunt for all of the boys.
Sophie says she won't tell anyone, but the giant says he knows she will. As she continues saying she wouldn't have told anyone, the giant picks her up and puts her in a small place where she can sleep. Sophie says she'll escape, but the giant warns her never to leave his residence unless he's with her. Sophie says she'll still try to escape because she has instincts, but the giant says she's not really clever. As she then insults his poor English, the giant looks disappointed and says he can't always know everything. Sophie says sorry for being rude, and as the giant puts a shiny glass jar on the table, she asks what's inside. The giant says it's a dream, and Sophie mentions that she never dreams because she has insomnia. The giant finds this interesting, and after reading a book to her, she falls asleep. He then leaves the room and heads to another place where he keeps a lot of other dreams in different jars. After entering the room, the giant puts one of the dreams inside a strange device. Shortly after, Sophie wakes up and sees the giant sleeping, so she sneaks out and tries to escape. Unfortunately, she doesn't go too far before a man-eating giant catches her. The friendly giant sees this, and she calls for his help, but he ignores her because he warned her not to leave his room. Just as the other giant eats her, Sophie wakes up from the nightmare, looking scared. She then accuses the giant of making her have a nightmare. As she mentions that it was too scary, the giant says it has to be like that because she needs to know the danger she'll be putting herself in if she escapes. He also warns her that if the other giants see her with him, they'll eat her up. As he then sits to eat his giant cucumber, he puts a green drink on the table, and Sophie asks what it is. The giant says it's called frobscottle, and that it's what all giants drink. After looking at the bottle, Sophie notices that the bubbles inside are moving downward instead of upward like regular human drinks. Sophie asks the giant about this, and he says that giants don't like the upward bubbles because it makes them burp. He adds that they love the downward bubbles because it gives them a great feeling, which involves farting. As Sophie wonders what he's talking about, he drinks it and farts in a really strange way while looking happy. Just then, a giant named Fleshlumpeter shows up at the friendly giant's house and asks who he's talking to. The giant quickly gets Sophie to hide, and he denies talking to anyone. Suddenly, Fleshlumpeter starts smelling something familiar and asks if the giant has a human being inside his room. He denies this again, and as Sophie hides inside the cucumber, Fleshlumpeter starts looking around to see if he can find anything. He eventually picks up the cucumber and says he's hungry. The friendly giant doesn't know that Sophie is inside the cucumber, so he tells Fleshlumpeter to eat it if he wants. Just as Fleshlumpeter is about to eat it, the friendly giant sees Sophie trying to jump out of the cucumber. He looks shocked by this and immediately reminds Fleshlumpeter that he hates vegetables. Fleshlumpeter throws the cucumber on the floor, and as he's about to smash it with his feet while saying the things he hates, the friendly giant stops him. He also mentions that Fleshlumpeter hates water, and he confirms this. As Fleshlumpeter leaves, he takes the giant's frobscottle and says that he's a disgrace to other giants because he's nothing like them.
You is an insult to giant people.
Following this, the friendly giant brings Sophie out of the cucumber and takes her to his other room to get her cleaned up. Sophie looks surprised to see all the jars inside there, but she doesn't say anything. After the giant baths her with clean water, he puts her near a fireplace to keep her warm. Sophie immediately complains about this because it's very hot, and he takes her away from there. Sophie then asks for clothes to wear, and he brings her some options from a box of scraps. As Sophie decides on what to wear, the giant clears a treehouse for her to stay in after she's done. When Sophie shows the giant her clothes, he looks surprised and asks where she saw the red jacket she's wearing. She says it was among the clothes he gave her, but as he still looks at her strangely, Sophie asks if there's a problem. The giant says there's nothing wrong and that she shouldn't worry about it. As he then carries her to the treehouse, he says she'll have to wait inside while he goes to work. Sophie asks what he does for work, but he says it's a secret that he can't tell her. Sophie says she won't tell anyone, and as she keeps disturbing him about it, he says he catches dreams. Sophie says she wants to come with him, but he insists that she needs to stay back in the house. He adds that Sophie will be eaten by the other giants if she leaves, but she still wants to go out with him.
I is going dream catching.
The giant eventually drops her into the treehouse and walks away. As Sophie looks around, she sees the different jars inside the treehouse, and after a while, she heads out to convince the giant to let her come with him. He still refuses to accept her request, but she tells him that the other man-eating giants could come into his house and take her away. She also mentions that if he wants her to say her own secrets too, she'll do that. She then mentions that she sometimes sneaks out of the orphanage and steals things around. She adds that she has never had a best friend, and she feels she's just like the giant. He still says he doesn't trust that she'll behave herself, but she promises not to cause him any trouble. With this, he takes her outside and tells her to hold her breath because they'll have to walk past the sleeping giants in the fields. As the giant gently walks past the others, he tries really hard to avoid making a sound, but Fleshlumpeter still wakes up and grabs him. Sophie falls to the ground, and as she runs away to hide inside an old car, she loses her blanket. Fleshlumpeter then asks the friendly giant where he's going, and he says he's headed to work.
Just take it. Do something.
Fleshlumpeter says he might put them in trouble one day if someone sees him, but he says he'll never be caught. He adds that Fleshlumpeter needs to let the other giants sleep during the day, but he says that he wants them to play since they're awake. Just then, one of the giants carries the car Sophie is hiding in and puts the friendly giant on it. Another giant also stays on the opposite side and uses two cars as skates. As he heads down a hill to hit the friendly giant and the car he has been placed on, Sophie steers them off course. With this, the friendly giant knocks down the bad giant, and the others laugh at him. The friendly giant then mentions that rain is about to fall. As they all look worried, the rain suddenly starts falling, and since they're scared of water, they quickly run to hide. The friendly giant then picks up Sophie's glasses and opens his bag so she can hide inside. After they walk away from giant country, Sophie says he doesn't deserve to be bullied by the other giants. The friendly giant says there's nothing he can do, but Sophie still mentions that it's not right. Meanwhile, Fleshlumpeder sees Sophie's blanket in the field, and as he smells it, he realizes that it's for a human being. Since the scent is still fresh, Fleshlumpeder believes that the friendly giant is hiding someone from them. Shortly after, the friendly giant takes Sophie to a place called Dream Country. As Sophie admires the stars in the sky, the friendly giant says that he sometimes hears different sounds coming from the stars. Sophie asks what more he can hear, and he says he can hear all the secret whisperings of the world. Sophie then walks toward a tree and admires the reflection of the moving dreams floating on a stream in front of it. As the friendly giant mentions that at some point in his life, someone used to call him a big friendly giant, or BFG, he jumps into the stream and asks Sophie what he can call her. She says he can call her name, and he then tells her to jump into the water. As she does, she finds herself in an upside-down world with a replica of the tree she was just admiring.
Oh my.
BFG then says that they're in the place where all dreams begin. After explaining how dreams are formed, he sees a rare dream flying around, but he struggles to catch it, even with Sophie's help. Just as the dream heads towards Sophie, BFG catches it and says that it seems to know her. He then shows her the dream and tells her to hold it. As she does so, she asks if he can hear the dream, and he says it sounds like her. After keeping it inside a jar, the dream draws Sophie's face, and she's left shocked by this. Before she calls BFG's attention to it, some other dreams start moving around aimlessly, and he tells her to try to catch them. As she runs away to do as she's told, BFG names the other dream they caught as Sophie's own. After a while, Sophie continues chasing one of the dreams, but it eventually merges with another one and turns red. Sophie still catches it, but BFG tells her to hand it over immediately because it's a nightmare. As he then takes it away, she asks what he'll do to it, and he says he'll lock it away. Shortly after, they leave the dream country, and as Sophie asks what they'll do next, he says it's time for dream blowing. As they reach the city, BFG goes to the house of a boy who is already sleeping. Sophie asks why he picked the boy, and BFG says he can hear his little heart. He then blows a dream into the house, and it gets sucked into the boy and his parents. Sophie is surprised by this, and she asks what the dream is about. BFG says that in the dream, the boy's parents will be shocked when he gets a call from the President of the United States, who will talk to him like they're buddies. Sophie says the dream ended quickly, but BFG mentions that it only seems like that on the outside. After they leave, BFG hears someone lamenting because they're looking for their child. Suddenly they hear movement around them, and they see that Fleshlumpeder and the other giants are just returning to the giant country. Sophie tells BFG that they're monsters, and he can't continue to let them get away with stealing people's children. BFG doesn't comment on this, and Sophie then asks if her blanket is with him. BFG says it's not, and Sophie mentions that she might have dropped it in giant country. BFG sounds scared as he hears this, but he doesn't tell Sophie anything.
He dropped it in giant country.
After a while, Sophie wakes up in front of the orphanage and looks surprised because she doesn't know how she got there. As she calls BFG to see if he's around, he shows up and says that the other giants must have found her blanket and they'll now be after her. Sophie says she doesn't want to stay in the orphanage and that they can work together to defeat the other giants. BFG then says he doesn't want a repeat of something that happened a while ago. As Sophie asks what he's talking about, BFG says he once caught a boy and took him to giant country. Unfortunately, the other giants found out about him and ate him. BFG blames himself for it and says he could have taken the boy back home, but he didn't. He also mentions that the red jacket Sophie wore the other day belongs to the boy. He then says he doesn't want Sophie to get hurt, but she still insists that she wants to come with him to giant country. BFG refuses, but as he walks away, Sophie follows him and asks if the boy was scared of the other giants. BFG says he was, but Sophie mentions that she's not scared of them. As she adds that she's different from the boy, BFG ignores her and walks away. Sophie looks unhappy to be back at the orphanage, and as she sits on her bed, she says she knows BFG can hear her because he always hears everything happening in the world. She then walks out to the balcony and says she knows he's around the area. When he doesn't show up, Sophie jumps off the balcony, and BFG shows up to save her. He also seems to like her, so he decides to take her back to giant country. As they arrive, Fleshlumpeder sees BFG and starts planning on how to find the human being he's moving around with. Shortly after, Sophie says they need to come up with a plan before the other giants attack them. But BFG mentions that he doesn't know what they can do. Almost immediately, Fleshlumpeder calls BFG's name, and he quickly tells Sophie to find a place to hide. After she does this, Fleshlumpeder enters the room and accuses BFG of having a human being with him. BFG denies this, but Fleshlumpeder tells the other giants to sniff the blanket so they can check BFG's room to hunt for the human being. After they sniff the blanket, they start scattering the room, and they even break the jars with dreams, and some of them escape. Sophie continues moving around to avoid being seen by the giants, and this plan seems to work well for her. As she keeps running around, she enters a treehouse and sees some drawings of BFG and a boy. She then realizes that the boy BFG talked about used to live inside the treehouse. Flesh Lump Peter nearly sees her inside there, but she hides well to avoid being seen. After a while, BFG gets tired of the giants scattering his house, and he sends them out angrily. Meanwhile, Sophie sees a picture of the Queen of England on the wall, and this gives her an idea. As BFG is walking around his house and lamenting about how some of the dreams have escaped,
Such a twitch-tickling problem to me all my life.
Sophie shows up and says she just thought of an idea that involves going to see the Queen so she can help them. Shortly after, BFG starts mixing a dream, and Sophie tells him to make sure it's scary. She adds that Flesh Lump Peter and the other giants should be there, and they should be seen kidnapping children in England. After BFG does this, Sophie tells her to add a bit of her and himself, too. As BFG continues mixing the dream, Sophie says she wants the Queen to see her standing on her windowsill when she wakes up. She says that BFG will also be there with her, and when he sees the Queen, he'll bow to her and say he's her loyal servant who is there to render his assistance to her regarding the missing children. BFG asks if he'll really meet the Queen, and as Sophie says he will, he says he's not sure he'll be able to do that. Later that night, BFG sneaks into the Queen's estate and drops Sophie on the windowsill, after which he blows the nightmare into the room. The Queen immediately starts talking in her sleep as she sounds scared.
Make them stop. Giants? Giants?
Mr. Tibbs, find out where she comes from.
Diddly umptious.
He's also served a cup of coffee, but he spits it out after drinking it. The Queen asks if he would prefer tea, but Sophie says he probably wants his frobscottle. The Queen doesn't know what this is, but BFG brings it out of his bag and says it's his personal drink. The Queen notices that the bubbles are moving differently, and BFG says it's how he likes it. He then asks if the Queen would like to drink some, and she says she doesn't mind. Before he pours her some, the country's army generals visit the Queen to get briefed on the situation. The Queen then mentions that, according to BFG, the bad giants will be out to hunt again in a few hours, and she wants them to be caught. She adds that she has promised BFG that they'll only go to the giant country once, but he says they won't even find the place the second time. He then shows the soldiers where they'll have to stay to catch the other giants. Following this, he serves everyone the frobscottle, but as they drink it, they all fart. The Queen doesn't seem to care about this, and she tells the soldiers to follow BFG to giant country immediately. As they get there, he tells them to wait just by the entrance so that the other giants won't see them.
We will hold here.
BFG then takes Sophie to his house, and he says he'll give the other giants a dream that will make them wake up with remorse. As they head outside, they watch the other giants sleeping, and Sophie then asks what's in her dream. BFG says it contains a lot of adventures, but there are also some downsides that don't really matter. He then mentions that he knows Sophie still has more dreams to catch, but it won't be in giant country. Sophie looks sad because she knows she'll have to leave, but she asks if BFG will still be able to hear her. He says he will, and Sophie looks happy to hear this. As BFG prepares to unleash the nightmare on the other giants, he realizes that he forgot his dream-blowing trumpet at the Queen's palace. Before he knows what's happening, though, Sophie carries the jar with the nightmare to the middle of the sleeping giants. Flesh Lump Eater wakes up and sees her, but as he's about to grab her, she breaks the jar, and the nightmare flies into the giants' noses. Flesh Lump Eater removes it from his nose, and as he wonders what it is, the other giants suddenly start insulting each other for always eating humans. Sophie tells Flesh Lump Eater that he's a bad giant, but he says he doesn't care. Before he grabs Sophie, BFG stands up for her, but he gets grabbed instead. As Flesh Lump Eater then insults him, BFG says it's time for him to stop his bad habits. Suddenly, the soldiers fly in and snatch all the giants into a net before carrying them away. BFG and Sophie look happy about this, and they watch the giants being taken away. The giants are then dropped on a lonely island and left with only cucumber seeds to eat. Flesh Lump Eater is unhappy about this, but there's nothing he can do. The next morning, Mary wakes Sophie up in the Queen's palace, and Mr. Tibbs also brings her one of the Queen's dogs. As Mary selects the dress she'll be wearing for the day, Sophie stands near the window and remembers the dream she had the previous night about BFG now living well and peacefully in giant country, as he also writes a book. She looks happy about this, and as she says good morning to BFG, he hears her from giant country and smiles.
He was happy.
Even though BFG initially felt he was powerless against the other giants who constantly bullied him, Sophie made him realize that he needed to stand up for himself. Despite being so small, she turned out to be the true hero of the story, who not only helped BFG get rid of his bullies, but also kept the children in the country safe from the bad giants. But their triumph showed that being small doesn't mean being weak, and that sometimes the smallest amongst us might be the mightiest in other ways.